And so here's to small things for 2022. May we have eyes to see and hearts to appreciate the small moments, small blessings, small increments, and small steps forward that God grants each of us every day. That's it for this episode of Time Eternal. Thanks for joining me in the quest to find meaning in time, eternity, and the faith in between. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with others or review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts, because sharing and reviewing is one of the best ways you can help others who need encouragement find this podcast. Of course, you can always find me on Instagram or Twitter at Nicole Rokas and online at NicoleRokas.com. I am most active on Instagram, where I often take the topic of the most recent podcast episode and expand on it in conversation, reflections, photos, videos, stories, and more. So if we haven't connected there, I hope you'll find me at Nicole Rokas. As always, special thanks to Ancient Faith Radio for hosting and supporting this podcast and so many others. Until next time, may God teach us to number our days aright, that our hearts may be bound with wisdom. Thank you and God bless.
Proclaiming Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox internet radio connection.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ. And as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. We are on Ancient Faith Radio, and I'm Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We are usually here live on Sunday evenings so that you can call in and join our conversation. But tonight, our show is pre-recorded because I'm running out of town because one of my kids is graduating from college. So I've got to be there, of course. So tonight's show is pre-recorded, but I'm so excited that you're here to join us, and I think you're going to enjoy it very much. We'd like to get here together on Sunday nights just to meet new Orthodox Christians. Anyone, right? Maybe someone who's done amazing things, or maybe someone whose life has been quieter and they're not doing anything big, but they're doing something lovely and they're just living out their faith in their corner of the world. I find Orthodox people are fascinating. You go to coffee hours at various churches and sit down next to someone and start asking them questions, and it is amazing what sorts of wonderful and interesting things you'll hear. I think, probably every human being is fascinating, but certainly Orthodox human beings are. We're all coming in here from different places, right? We have immigrants who come from faraway lands. We have their children and grandchildren who grow up kind of at the intersection of two cultures. There are always great stories and interesting things that happen there. And then, of course, we have a lot of converts here in the United States who have come in from other faiths and all sorts of different backgrounds. And everyone seems to find the church in a unique way. And it sort of means different things as people come in, right? Like, I'm always fascinated to hear different stories of conversions in particular, because I find that it's so many different aspects of the church that initially attract different people. But at any rate, I think Orthodox people really are fascinating. And here we are trying to be the body of Christ right here on earth. What better way to do that than to get to know one another and to build some Orthodox unity, the old-fashioned way, by getting to know each other. So tonight's show is being produced, of course, by Matushka Trudy Richter, and we have a wonderful guest. So I want to get straight to our guest now. Her name is Jennifer Anna Rich, and that name may actually sound familiar to you because she wrote a really beautiful book a few years ago called Prayer Spa: Ancient Treatments for the Modern Soul. And I love that book And I really, really enjoyed it. So I actually kind of feel like I know her maybe better than I really do because I've read her book. But actually, Jennifer is really, she's wonderful. She lives near Portland on a small farm. And so she's got her husband, they've got horses and sheep and chickens and cats and a dog. And not only is she a writer, but she actually also does, she makes prayer books and cards in her studio, which is really neat. She makes parchment herself from sheepskin. And then it's really neat. If you've ever seen her prayer cards on Etsy, they're beautifully printed little Orthodox prayers on beautiful paper. And it's just, what a neat thing, right? What a beautiful, handmade, lovely thing to have in your home. And I just think Jennifer is really neat. So I think you're going to enjoy her very much. So without any further ado, let's welcome her to the show. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Elisa.
I really do love your cards. I have to say, I've seen them on Etsy and I just think they're so neat. And I love that attention to detail and the way that, it's just sort of like a beautiful little peaceful thing, right? Like it's not a big thing. It's not even maybe a necessary thing. It's just a wonderful thing. And I love that. I think that's so great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I know sometimes just printing something on a piece of paper makes it more, attention grabbing or somehow gives it a little weight to its substance, I guess.
It does. It kind of elevates it, but it's wonderful. Well, so tell me all about yourself. Where does your story begin? Where were you born? What's your childhood like? How did it start?
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, let's see. I was born in Eugene, Oregon, and I grew up in a very loving family. My mom had sort of taught me a love of the artistic process, and she was a very creative mother. And my dad loved to travel, and so I did international traveling with him when I was younger, and kind of got my love of travel from my dad.
What sorts of places did you go? Like where would you travel with him?
Oh, well, I would meet him. I would meet him in Paris. Went to the Sorbonne for a little while during my college years in Paris. And when I was in high school, we went to France. I was always kind of gravitating towards France with the trips with him, and also took an earlier trip to Greece. But then I kind of started doing more travel in my 20s when I was working in Alaska in the fisheries. I worked in the fisheries in Alaska for 7 summers.
You know what? You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Hold on a second. The fisheries, my goodness. That's awesome. Okay, but wait, let's slow down though. Okay, so you got a love of travel from your dad, and it sounds like there are going to be some really good travel stories in our near future. But so tell me, so did you grow up in Eugene all the way then up until college?
Yes. My parents weren't very religious, didn't go to church or anything like that, but I always loved it. And my best friend across the street, her parents would drag her to the Catholic CCD classes to learn about, theology and things. And she hated going, but I loved it. So I would tag along with her whenever I could. But we just grew up on this little, just kind of, street, and we had ponies and we rode together. And I spent my whole time there. I guess, my grandparents, and especially my grandmother was praying for me, of course, while I was little, and they had a beautiful Christian faith. And that's, I think, was very instrumental in my turning to Christianity.
Oh, that's lovely. So when you were young, you liked going to the religious education classes with your friend. What do you think appealed to you about it? Were you just sort of fascinated with the idea of God and how all of it worked? Or what do you think was the fun in it for you?
I think so. I don't know. I don't know why I wanted to. I think, when I guess I spent a summer in Kansas with my grandparents when I was 6. And I think that was kind of the beginning of my Christian life. And then after that, I was just, maybe because my parents weren't that interested in it, I knew there was sort of a secret life there that that I had access to. And I always loved it. I just always knew that my person could be found in God. And when I was in high school, I got really involved in campus life and in my Protestant church youth group. And it's always been a part of me that I knew was yes. And there were times when my life wasn't that solid. My mom was bipolar, so we kind of, had a lot of adventures along that line, and so maybe.
I love how you put that. There was a lot of adventure.
Maybe
can
being
be
able
very
to hold
adventurous.
on to. Yes, yeah.
Well, and back in those days, like did they have great medications for bipolar disorder at the time? Or I guess it was manic
No,
depressive
it was
back in the day, right?
bad. Exactly. No, I mean when things got bad, they would give her a big shot of Thorazine or some heavy hitting drug that would knock her out, and then it was tough. And then later, in her life, all of those hard medications came back and gave her this Parkinson's like syndrome. So that was hard. I remember at certain times I was pushing my mom's wheelchair with one hand and pulling my daughter's stroller with another, kind of getting through that time in life when you had both little kids and failing parents. That was a hard time.
The sandwich years, absolutely. Oh gosh, yeah, it is. If I do think nowadays there are so many better treatments for bipolar disorder, and it was a hard time to be going through that. Absolutely. So, as you were growing up, did you have siblings, or how many? Who all was in your house at the time?
Yeah, I had a brother. He was 4 years younger than me, and so it was just my dad, my mom, my brother, and me. And it was just kind of a normal life growing up, and then went to college and ended up going to. I went to University of Colorado Boulder my first year, and then back to U of O. I hopped around a bit. In a little time in Paris at the Sorbonne, and then graduated from University of Oregon. And it was during that time that I was going to Alaska during the summers.
So were you interested in art, or were you interested in language, or both? Or like, what was I guess when you were first thinking about college and thinking about going off to Colorado, what did you think you were going to study, and what was your plan?
Interesting. Yeah, in Colorado, I was a creative writing major, and I thought it was maybe sort of this passing whim, because then I ended up being a romance language major, and that's what I graduated with in my undergraduate work. And so, but then the creative writing stuff came back to me, years later, as I was working on this book, Prayer Spa, Ancient Treatment. And then the funny thing is, it sort of leapfrogged as well. So my language background, I thought that was kind of, I thought the best thing about learning French was that I could order off a French menu, in a restaurant. And that's what my whole undergraduate work had come down to, But then with our business, my husband and I have a paper business called Oblation Papers Press. And so I was able to kind of move that in an international direction. So we started doing trade shows in Tokyo and London and Paris. And so I got to use some of that, undergraduate work eventually as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Isn't it funny that, as you collect knowledge over the years, you think like, well, that was wasted, I gather. And then later on, it turns out, oh no, look, God was just preparing you for the next thing. He's been stocking up your backpack with all these skills so that you'd have them when you got there. That is wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah.
That is great. So when you went to Boulder, were you just there for a year, or how long were you there?
Yeah, I was there for a year. I loved it, but it was expensive being out of state. And I knew the thing I really wanted to do was study in France. And so I just came back to save money for a year before going over there.
Okay. And then you just applied and headed over to the Sorbonne. That's wonderful. That's fantastic. I think there are so many people who would like to do that, and they don't do it. I think, you know what I mean? Like there's sometimes those big steps are hard to make? Was it your dad, do you think, that sort of
Right.
encouraged you to do that? Or what made you bold enough to go home and save up money to go to France?
Well, I think it was my high school French teacher, actually, more than my dad. She was
Ah.
very inspiring. And by the time I left high school, French was my favorite thing. And I just live in Paris, and then the University of Oregon only had a program in Poitiers, a different town in France. But there was this big book in the I don't know, the administration building at the
Hmm.
college. And I went through all these different programs from all these different colleges. And I finally ended up going with a program from SUNY New York because they had one at the Sorbonne, and it worked out great. And, the money part transferred really well, and the grades, I didn't really work that hard, but it all transferred back as A's. So the whole thing worked out beautifully.
That's
For the
excellent.
most part. I mean, there were some bumps along the way for sure. Like I went to school for a semester, and then I took a semester off to work on a horse ranch in the Loire Valley, and
Oh,
it was
wow.
really neat because I got my own like little room up in this old farmhouse, and I had to chop my own wood for my wood stove, and I would, you know, feed the
What?
horses and clean their stalls, and I didn't get a ride very much, but anyway, I was just immersed in this farm life for a while, and that
Wow.
was really fun. But at one point, uh, I don't know, I went away for the weekend, and I didn't come back on the right day. I extended it a day or two, and the woman who ran the farm a bit upset about that, and she even so that was a really big you know, difficult moment in my life where I was asked to leave this idyllic kind of farm I was living on. And so I,
Ah.
got on the train and packed my bags and got on the train. And luckily I had a sort of a French family that I have stayed in touch with all these years. We go visit them every couple of years. And I just got on the train and went to their house, and um, they took me in, and I was there.
Well, it is. I mean, it's so, as a young American woman, right? Like, you've gone to the Sorbonne, you're sort of exploring in France. It, even though you're working on this farm, it is kind of like vacation time, and it's all kind of magical, and you're trying to go backpack around and see everything, right? Like, it is a very different frame of mind
Right.
from someone who's got a serious job. And like, this lady's like, yeah, where
Right,
are you? You're
right.
meant to take care of the horses. You know, it is. I think that age group in
Exactly.
particular, sometimes it's hard to take things seriously, but especially, gosh, in France, right? How does one turn down an extra day in the, you know, I definitely, I think
I know.
that's sort of a classic moment there. But so were you at all concerned, like, as you're doing all these things? So you go to Boulder, and then you've got a sort of a gap year where you're working, and then you're at the Sorbonne, and then you're at this farm, and now you're at this other family's. Were you confident that you were for sure going to finish your degree, or were you kind of bouncing around and not sure exactly where all this was leading?
Mm. No, I was sure I was going to finish the degree. I guess that wasn't, I didn't, I think, I think young people have more options than they're more open-minded about some of the gap year stuff these days. But I was on the track, I was going to do the right, the good girl thing or whatever. The thing that I wasn't sure about is what I would do afterwards. When I was living in France, I was sort of, I wasn't going to church. I don't think I was praying very much. And I was sort of taking a little break from God too, actually, which, I look back and I feel a certain sadness about that. But then when I got back my senior year in college, I was just working really hard at finishing and graduating. And in fact, I had to make up that year and a half in 1 year, do anything except study, study, study.
Oh, wow.
But
So
out
you
of
paid
that
dearly
time,
for all that fun. you, you really, I mean, because you've there. I mean,
I
it was
did.
such a relaxed pace, and then all of a sudden it becomes this crazy pace to try to catch up. My goodness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. My
Oh,
last year was no fun at all. I got all the fun in earlier.
yeah.
but then, um, but then after that, I just had this really strong feeling that what I wanted to do was to work as a missionary. And maybe South America, because I, studied a lot of Spanish too, and thinking about working with Wycliffe Bible translators. And so, I had a really strong desire to do that, and I was set on that path, and I went to Cameroon for a few months and worked with the Bible translators there, and I really loved it. And so I came back, and that's what kind of led me to graduate school in theology, just to learn more about
so
in that direction.
So when you're growing up, you have sort of informal connections with different churches and with Christianity. But then you mentioned in college, you had sort of, was there some kind of organization you were involved in? How did Christianity for you go from sort of this unstructured thing that you're here and there having access to you being a part of a body enough that you would have an idea of how to go be a missionary and who to call and where to go and all of that? You know what I mean? It feels like things were awfully loose. At what point did they solidify enough for you to be able to do something like that?
Yeah. I think it was in my senior year. Yeah, college was a real sort of crucible time for that, I guess. My first year in Boulder, I was really involved in Campus Crusades for Christ, and that was an organization on campus. But I don't know. We had this experience where everybody was supposed to invite all of our friends to this movie to help, get them into the 4 spiritual laws, and then the movie was just really tough, man. It was hell and brimfire, all over, and
no.
It was a scare tactic kind of thing. And I left that movie, and at the same time I left Campus Crusade, and it was an unfortunate event. I know a lot of people were doing a lot of good in that organization.
Sure.
That was kind of maybe my last straw and my excuse to go up and do what I wanted.
And I mean, I like that you put it that way, actually, because I think so often that's kind of the case, right? When something happens and it's kind of a one-off thing, and then the person is like, that's it, I'm leaving the church, or I'm leaving this organization.
Right.
A lot of times it is kind of like, well, I was looking for an out and I found it. Thank you. I'm out of here.
Right. But, exactly.
So then you went back and worked, and you went to France and all that. And so then was it when you got back to Oregon that you got involved more into a different Christian organization, or how did that work?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't really an organization. I think it was really the let me go. And so I just kept feeling this impulse inside me. And, studying languages, I was thinking, maybe I'll be a translator of poetry. Maybe I'll be a teacher of language. I didn't really want to do that. I really wanted to work with the language itself. And so just, I think moving from poetry translation to Bible translation was the bridge that made me want to do that. And then, and so I applied, I went to Cameroon. I also, that was a little adventure that was up my alley. And then after that, I was applying to Wycliffe Bible translation, letters, and they said I needed to get more education in the Bible. And so that's, so then
that makes sense. They wanted you to have like theological background in addition to just the language background. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So by the way, what was Cameroon like? We have to back up just a second here, and I got to find out. What was Cameroon like? Like, so you're just, a young single woman, and were you in like a small office with other people, or what was it like being in Cameroon?
Well, I lived in a house with 2 British women, missionaries, and it was wonderful. We were in this really remote village. We had to hike down to the village. We had to hike down to the stream to get water every day for washing and cooking. And they were on literacy work during the day. They started out by developing a written alphabet for this remote language, and then translating some of the local stories into the language, and then starting with the Book of Mark, and working little by little with local villagers to get the translations right. I mean, it was such interesting work, and there were in translation, you'll come across things like, well, if my child asks me for now I don't remember the verse, but if my child asks me for something to eat, would I give him a snake? And in the language, in the custom there, they're like, yes, please, we love eating snake meat. And so there's all of these cultural, little differences that you have to take into account besides just the language.
Oh, that's funny, right? And then you're in this quandary, right? Do you rephrase Christ's own words, or do you what do you do? Do you just say, like, do I just give him something terrible to eat and leave it at that? That's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Gosh,
You have to really frame
tricky.
it within the context.
Yeah, that's very tricky. Okay, excellent. Well, and then, of course, then it sort of naturally follows that you need to have a lot of good theological knowledge, since sometimes you can't just literally translate, and you have to be able to think outside the box a little bit. So when you got back from Cameroon and you're talking with them and they say you need more theological education, you didn't consider doing something different entirely. You were just like, yes, that's my next step. That sounds great. Is that, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you were kind of primed for that already. Where did you end up going?
Yeah, it was something I wanted to do. So I looked around, and I ended up going to Regent College, which is in Vancouver, BC in Canada. Nice. It was a really neat place. It was a real international Protestant school for people who wanted to take a year or two out of their, working lives to become educated Christians and then go back into the world. And rather than, as a seminary where it was focused on making pastors or something, or so I went there and I met my husband on the first day, and he was, an American, and I was an American, and we both kind of hit it off. And
that's lovely.
He was interested in Bible translation too, or being, doing missionary work as well.
Oh, lovely. Okay. And was he about the same age as you, and where had he been all those years while you were having these adventures?
Yeah, he was the same age, and he grew up on the East Coast and also in the military. So kind of he had got some traveling under his belt. I mean, he lived in Morocco for a while as a kid, and then Hawaii as a teenager, and then the East Coast. And he was just there to kind of try to understand God too, and understand it on a deeper level. And we just really hit it off, and ended up graduating both. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
A couple years later. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. All right. So then the two of you, I guess you were kind of thinking that maybe once you finish this program, you guys were going to go off and be missionaries. Was that kind of the plan you were formulating? And did you?
Yeah. Well, we did go to a Wycliffe translators boot camp, but we spent some time exploring the possibility, and then I don't know, along the way we kind of in seminary too, we sort of realized this understanding of the priesthood of all believers, and that maybe there wasn't this really clear list of priorities that God had for people's working lives, and being the missionary wasn't necessarily at the top of the list according to God. And so we, at the same time, we're sort of developing this life in paper making, and so we both liked working with our hands and doing creative work. And it just happened that paper making fell into our path, and we started making paper on our honeymoon. We had a month-long honeymoon on the Oregon coast, and we just started throwing pots and grasses into this blender. Yeah, making paper, spreading it all over this little apartment that we
had. That is not a story I have ever heard before. I've never heard of anyone do it. That's so great. But out of curiosity, though, did you guys decide, was it more like you started to think that maybe being a missionary wasn't as good a thing as you were thinking? Or was it more that just you guys weren't the ones who were really called to it?
I think we had sort of a false priority list that like that was the best thing you could do for God. And then we realized that there were lots of good things that you could do for God, and you had to follow the path that God had set in front of us, you know?
Oh, okay. You were thinking to be a good Christian, you're supposed to go be a missionary. And then it was kind of like, no, you can just be a good Christian, like just, you know, in any walk of life.
In doing lots of things. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
and to serve
how
God,
lovely.
you know.
Yeah, it's sort of wonderful that that's what you got from the theological school as well. This sort of sense of like the diversity and plurality of the Christian life, and how, you know, all of this is important. All of the things that we do are important.
Right.
I love that.
Right.
I love that.
Whatever you do, yeah.
That's beautiful. So we're going to take a very short break, and then we're going to be right back with Jennifer Rich. We're going to hear all about, well, a lot about paper making is going to be my guess, and then also about this wonderful book that she made and all sorts of great things. So we'll be right back on Everyday Orthodox in just a few minutes.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Hi, this is John Maddox. You know, when you support Ancient Faith Radio, you're not only helping to make this ministry possible for you, but also for people like Bryce in Australia.
I'd firstly just like to say that I love your show and what you do. It means a lot to all of us listening. I'm down in Australia, and over here, Orthodoxy is basically unheard of. I'm not Orthodox. I was raised into an evangelical Protestant family. However, from a gradual exposure and desire to learn more about Orthodoxy, I've come to agree and see truth in pretty much everything the church teaches. The nearest English-speaking Orthodox church is several hours away, and I feel all alone in my pursuit of the faith here. Currently, my only exposure to Orthodoxy is through Ancient Faith Radio and my friend. How should I introduce the idea that I may be inquiring into Orthodoxy to my parents? Thanks again, Bryce.
Would you consider a donation to AFR right now? You can do so on our app or go to our website at ancientfaith.com/support. Ancient Faith Radio, here for you and for people all over the world.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and tonight we are talking with Jennifer Anna Rich. And Jennifer, I love how just sort of organic and beautiful your story is, where you're kind of moving from one fascinating thing to another, right? Like you're at the Sorbonne, and now you're on a farm in France, and now you're here and there, and now you're back in Cameroon and British Columbia, and all these wonderful places. Each of them actually really wonderful in and of themselves. But it's funny because so often, you know, I think that oftentimes people are like, I'm going to be an accountant. I must go study accounting, and everything's so linear. But instead you have this sort of beautiful curvy path that you've been following. And then you meet your wonderful husband, and there you are, freshly married, and you decide to start making paper. How did you even know how to make paper? Like, when you were traveling, did you go to an exhibit of handmade paper and you saw it and this inspired you? Or like, how did this even come into your heads?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, in Vancouver, BC, where we were going to graduate school, there's a place called Granville Island, and it's a little sort of industrial arts island in the middle of the city where you can go down and visit little shops, and a lot of them have artist galleries attached, and you can see the process. And I remember falling in love with handmade paper there in one of the art galleries and craft galleries, and just seeing all of the texture and possibility of paper, this, you know, very basic substance we all interact with every day and take for granted. But the way that it had been made, kind of in roughly beautifully and in an art form where all the fibers were part of the thing instead of hidden and so smooth and white. So we saw the paper there, and we got a book on paper making. I ended up getting a job in a paper shop on Granville Island called Paper Ya. And I would ride my bike across town to while I wasn't in class at graduate school. And so paper just kind of like, I don't know, it seeped into my fibers, I guess, and Ron too. And so we, it's a very simple process to make paper. And Ron is my husband. He loves to make things, and he's very good at making lots of interesting things. So he made a paper making studio and a paper beater and a paper, put these vats and everything together. And so he was able to put the equipment together that we needed to make paper. And then we just started selling it at the Saturday market, which was a really supportive, creative environment in Eugene. And it just kind of went from there.
Oh, that is wonderful. Okay, well that's really neat, actually. And so the two of you continue to make paper to this day, right? Like, how long have you been making paper now?
We have our company is called Oblation Papers Press, and it's in Portland. It's kind of a retail paper and fine pen store that's in the front, and then in the back of the shop, we do paper making every day, and we have antique printing presses, letterpress, which you print one at a time by hand. We do a lot of wedding invitations and greeting cards, and this whole world of paper just kept moving forward for us. And so we kind of just followed along with that plan.
Oh, that's so cool. That's really neat. And I could imagine that, one might think, oh, well, everything's becoming digital and we don't need paper anymore. But on the other hand, there's something so beautiful about handmade paper. Like, maybe we don't need so much mass-produced paper as we used to, but maybe there's even more room for the handmade now, right? Because there's something even more special about it. Is that business still like really doing well in the face of technology?
Yeah. It all circles around. So even in this time of COVID, it was pretty tough for a while. We didn't know if our business would survive or not. And Ron and I don't usually work in the retail store, but in this case, we were down there every single day. We were trying to keep our business alive, and our staff wasn't comfortable working. And so our two daughters ended up coming and joining us. And the four of us ran our business for several months. And then the surprising thing is that coming out of COVID, it's thanks to our customers and our staff and our kids, it's better than ever. And people have been so supportive, and God has been so faithful.
Wow, thank God. Oh, that's wonderful. And then I love the name Oblation Press, Oblation, like an offering. Is that so?
Yeah.
And of course, at some point in this story, you're going to become Orthodox. How did that happen? Was your husband Orthodox?
Yeah. No, we did that together. And you're right. We named our business Oblation before we ever were Orthodox, but now you can find that word in the liturgy. But I don't know, about 25 years ago, we were living on Vashon Island and making paper and starting to do letterpress printing. And we came across Father Trifon.
Right.
And he has a show on Ancient Faith, I believe.
The morning offering. Absolutely.
The morning offering. Yeah.
When you say you came across him, like, were you traveling around and you went into the monastery, or you just walked into him at a coffee shop, or how does that happen?
Well, we knew him because he had it was another Saturday, like, farmer's market event. And so he would set up his tent and bring the holy things to the people every Saturday at the main area in Vashon Island. And so he would have, censers and books, and we would always stop and talk theology with them. And eventually he suggested that we check out the Orthodox Church. And so we started going to this little church called Holy Trinity up at the base of Mount Rainier. And we had to take a ferry off the island. It took about an hour and a half to get there. But, like my husband said, it's never too far to experience the kingdom of God.
That's lovely. We should all try to remember that, I think, when we complain about our drive to church. That's a long way. But you were on Vashon Island. You didn't go to the monastery, but you went to a different parish?
Yeah, the monastery was very fledgling back then. It just had 2 monks, and it wasn't. It's grown a lot since then. We've been back to visit it, and now it's beautiful and much larger. But they weren't really having services for the lay people then.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. So you started just occasionally going to the foot of Mount Rainier then to this parish. And what did you think when you got there? Like, what was it? How did Orthodoxy present itself to you? You know what I mean? Like, was it, because it's one thing, the idea of Orthodoxy, and then it's entirely another, the reality of walking into a liturgy.
Absolutely. And for us, I mean, we were getting master's degrees in Protestant theology. So it was quite a leap for us, and we had heard a little bit about Orthodoxy just through some history classes at our school. But, nobody was talking too much about it. And then when we discovered this little church, it was just like heaven. And I swear we went there. We were kind of just blown away by the beauty of the liturgy, by the truth and the simplicity of the 4th century theology just hadn't changed. It wasn't trying to market itself to everybody in the current society. And we really love that about it. But at one point we sort of thought, no, we're really invested in these these master's degrees in Protestant theology. We better, just stick with that. And we tried to stay away a little bit, but then it was really the beauty of the service that brought us back. We couldn't not go.
Oh, how lovely. How lovely. Well, and when you were younger, you kind of tried to get away from God, and you didn't get very far that time either. So I guess it's not a surprise that you couldn't get away this time either. But how lovely. And were the two of you really that much in sync about it? Was it like, oh, we both really like this for the same reasons? And because a lot of times one person really falls in love with Orthodoxy and the spouse is much more skeptical, or were the two of you just sort of in sync about these things?
Yeah, we were. And it was not just the two of us, but there was this whole group of there were 16 or 17 people coming into the church that Pascha. It felt like this Renaissance movement of people discovering the Orthodox Church. We would go up there for Holy Week, and we would all just camp on the grounds. And one of the readers actually had this old house, and we would all stay in the house and tent on the lawn and go to all the services. Wow. It was just a magical time.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's just wonderful. Okay. And so at the time, did you have kids already? Or had you not?
No, but our oldest daughter was baptized in that church, Pascal. And then we moved to Portland. That was an OCA church, and we then ended up in the Greek Orthodox diocese here in Portland, and where we've been for the last 20 years.
That's great. I think in a way that it's actually really nice to change jurisdictions here and there. I think you come away with with an interesting perspective where you sort of see that some things are variable and some things are just Orthodox, and there's just I think you really get a natural sense of which is which when you move around a little bit. So was it an adjustment for you? I mean, was the liturgy in Greek all of a sudden, and was it quite different, or was it really being in Portland pretty similar to the OCA?
Yeah, there were some adjustments, especially the tones of the Byzantine music compared to the Russian music. But the church that we moved to was just full of kids, and we had young kids, and it was just it was a parish with a lot of converts, and the Greeks and the converts were all just really open and supportive, and it has been a wonderful parish to belong to, St. John the Baptist.
I was just going to say, is that St. John in Beaverton? Is that?
Yeah.
That's a great parish. That's really neat. Oh, lovely. Lovely. Okay.
Yeah,
so you guys
we've been so blessed.
So are you then still, did you move into town, or did you move to your farm when you went to Portland?
We lived in town for a while, and then we moved out to the farm, and it was just, we wanted to raise our daughters on the farm, and they had horses and we had horses, and the girls and I rode together and jumped and took lessons and did little horse shows for 12 years. And that was
Oh,
fun.
wow. Oh, that's wonderful.
As I mentioned, I had a pony growing up, and so it just seemed like the thing to do. And it's good, it's good for young girls to manage big horses and to feel like, they're in control, and, also not a lot of time for boys. And,
Yes.
it's a good package.
It is. I can definitely see the allure of this. This is a good idea. I love that. So at first, was it just, you wanted to be around horses more, so you needed to move out into the country to have enough land for the horses? Or did it evolve slowly into the farm that it is today? Or did you just leap head first in?
No, it evolved slowly. And my husband, he works hard every Saturday, every weekend to build it up still for all of these 15 years. And we have, we grow our own vegetables. We have our own chickens and eggs and sheep. And so we, as you mentioned, we harvest a sheep or two every year or so, and we eat the meat, and I make parchment out of the skins, and then prayer books out of the parchment. And it's been a nice little situation. In fact, the sheep are called, my husband Ron discovered these sheep, and they're called Saint Croix sheep, which means Holy Cross in French. And that was before I ever started making books. But now to use these Holy Cross sheep skin parchments for my books is just wonderful. I love it.
Oh, that is really neat. That's lovely. Oh, and what we haven't talked about is Prayer Spa. Because I remember when this book came out, and I loved it so much. And I know you and I actually got to meet at one point. But tell us a little bit about Prayer Spa and what brought you to want to write it. I know you mentioned you had writing experience, and you had been maybe was it creative writing that you were majoring in earlier? And how did all this come about?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I've really had this idea of loving my prayer life and wanting to help other people love their prayer lives for about 10 years now. And really, I don't know, I feel like, God wants us to want to come to him. And I feel like as a parent and as a mother of daughters, I want them to spend time with me, but I don't want them to just feel like they have to show up, out of obligation and spend 5 or 10 minutes with me. And I want them to come and want to spend, time with me. And I feel that way about God too in my prayer life. I feel like, I don't want to just feel like I have to show up and go through these rote prayers, but I want to have feeling in my prayers, and I want to, tell myself that I want to go to my prayer corner. And then when I get there, I want to feel good and want to spend more time. And so I've been kind of working on that, and especially on stillness in prayer. For ever since my 20s, I've been really curious about stillness in prayer and just being with God. And so when I got this idea for the Prayer Spa, I mentioned it to my husband, and she's like, yeah, that's the perfect idea for you. And so it's not that I really wanted to write a book. It's just that I couldn't not put these ideas all together and make it into a book.
I love that. I love how compelled you are to do all of the different things, like that things just sort of call to you, and you're like, well, I mean, I couldn't say no to it. I think maybe that's in your nature. I think that's really quite beautiful, though. But so, yeah, you called it Prayer Spa, and just explain a little bit. You're sort of merging these Christian ideas about prayer with this more secular concept of a spa, right? Like, how does that work?
Right. And when I talk about spa, I'm not thinking of pampering and, pedicures and things like that. I'm thinking of more like natural elements and essential oils, or, taking the waters, or, minerals that are from the earth that you can use. And and also just having prayer be a balm for your life, and this idea of the mind, the body, and the soul all being so interconnected. And so in my book, it's all taken from, and plus I just can't stop reading the fathers and the ancient hesychasts, and I just love reading about prayer. And I got to go to a prayer conference in England a few years ago and spend time with Metropolitan Callistos, and I've had a nice correspondence with him since then via email, and I just I've read so many of his books, and now I'm just diving into the Philokalia after not letting myself do that for so many years. So I feel like prayer is this balm, and it's this way of just like being with God. And one of the first Orthodox books I read about that was from Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, and he talks about being with God and about how you can gather the crumbs of wasted time into being with God. And my favorite prayer for many years now has just been this simple prayer that he taught me through his book, and it says, "Here I am." And you just be, you just in your prayer corner, you just quiet your mind, you descend your mind into your heart, and you just say to God, "Here I am." And then you just be still for a little while and let your heart have the feeling of being with God.
That is so beautiful. Oh, well, and I think the truth is, like, some of the most profound prayer is really silence, right? It's quiet. It's just presenting ourselves, being present, allowing God to be present, allowing ourselves to feel his presence. I think some of the most profound prayer experiences, it's not so much what you're reading out of a book, which is not to say that reading prayers out of a book is not useful. It's wonderful, actually. And
Right.
it helps us to grow so much in our understanding. But then there's also just room for this just silence, right? The hesychasm. It's how wonderful. So how would you describe your book? How does it reach out to help people? Like, if I'm someone who's looking to develop my prayer life in a particular way, how does this book approach me? And is it like super practical? What is it? How would you describe it?
I wouldn't say it's super practical in a straightforward way. It's sort of a, I don't know, it's sort of a gathering of the wisdom of the Orthodox Church and into a sort of a quiet, poetic format, I would say, to help people, give people a little, maybe inspiration, maybe a few tools to think about how to develop their prayer corner, how to curate their prayer corner, how to use their 5 senses at the prayer corner, how to use your mind, body, and soul to worship God. It's sort of a gentle book, and it's not super linear, like you say. My life hasn't been, which is true. But I don't know. I think it appeals to people if they're, for me also, I'm trying to slow down in my life, and I do have a busy life. I'm rushing from one thing to another, and it's starting to take hold, this slowing down process that I've been working on for a long time, but I'm still not very good at it. But I do love to have self-talk, to say, I want to go to my prayer corner. When I get to my prayer corner, enjoy it there, and use the 5 senses, to help myself want to be there, and set aside the time, and just feel the Holy Spirit, and sense the presence of God. And it's something that the hesychastic fathers, the desert fathers of the Orthodox Church, they talk about it a lot, and how you can, like Saint Theophan the Recluse talks a lot about how you can descend your mind into your heart, and you can, feel the presence of God, and you can be with God. And it's very ethereal. It's sort of I think it's kind of a combination of practicing prayer in this way, and also the grace of God and the gift of God. and the Holy Spirit, as He chooses to bring it into people's lives. But I don't know. I love it, and I love to hear stories about other people loving their prayer life.
Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful. So it was published a few years ago, like 2018, right? Was it with Paraclete Press? I'm trying to remember who your
Yes.
publisher was. So
Mm-hmm.
people can find it on the Paraclete website or Ancient Faith or Amazon. It's sort of all over the place, I think. And then tell us a little bit about I've forgotten the word now. Is it letterpress? The prayers that you're printing up on handmade paper. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes.
What made you decide to do that, and what are those like, and where can people find them?
Right. Well, those are my letterpress prayer cards, and they're printed on heavy cotton stock, and they're just Orthodox prayers that again, it's sort of a contribution to people's prayer corners, or they're nice to give to people. They're like 3.5 by 6 inches, and you can find them on my Etsy site, which is also called Prayer Spa. And, I have like the prayer for the beginning of the day by Saint Philaret of Moscow. That's like one of the most popular ones, probably number one. And then Praying the Hours is there, and morning prayers and evening prayers. And I have this studio that my husband built for me in the back of our house with a big old cast iron letterpress and his bookbinding equipment, and that's where I do that. It looks out into the forest on our small farm.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is just lovely. And they really are just such beautiful I love the idea of giving those out as gifts. Just like what a blessing to pass on to someone. It's so wonderful. So wonderful. Well, good.
You.
Well, I'm going to put links to your Prayer Spa Etsy shop as well as to the Prayer Spa Books page in case any of our listeners would like to find them on the Everyday Orthodox Facebook page. Those links will be there. But
thank you. I also have a website. It's jenniferannarich.com. And I haven't mentioned it, but the thing that this book, Prayer Spa, is leading me toward now is leading Prayer Spa pilgrimages. And so my friend Helen Stinman and I were leading a Prayer Spa pilgrimage to Greece this fall for 10 days, and we'll be practicing prayer. And Frederica Matthews Green will be joining us and traveling with us.
Oh, wow. Tell me, what does that look like? Are you going to be all over Greece or just in one spot, or what will you do?
We'll be traveling around a little portion of Greece, not all over. It's kind of a slow moving tour for women. It's a Prayer Spa pilgrimage where we'll be visiting monasteries and churches, and we'll have a morning prayer gathering and an afternoon prayer gathering, and we'll be, focusing on nourishing our minds, bodies, and souls, like we did at a retreat last weekend. Actually, we had a group of women join us at Mount Angel Abbey. There's a Benedictine guest house there. We had a morning prayer gathering, and we did watercolor journaling, and we did some eccentrics, which is this movement-based sort of simple stretching, gentle stretching program that's also called Aging Backward.
Oh, this is wonderful. That sounds so refreshing and relaxing at the same time, just sort of filling up and slowing down. I love that. And so if anyone's interested in any of the Prayer Spa pilgrimages, is that at jenniferannarich.com?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, I'll put a link on our Facebook page, but also that's easy enough to find for my audience, Jennifer Anna with 2 N's, rich.com. And you can meet Jennifer and go on a Prayer Spa pilgrimage. That just sounds absolutely wonderful. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time with us. It's really a delight to get a chance to just sit down and talk with you.
Oh, it's been delightful for me too. Thanks so much, Elisa.
Oh, it was lovely. It's wonderful and your story's so much fun. And because you just sort of embrace all the different things that present themselves. And I love that about you. So this has been wonderful. And thank you also to our audience for joining us tonight, and come back next week and we'll meet another wonderful Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night.
Are you curious about the Orthodox Christian faith?
Do you